I've made videos on character trading culture before, like a few of them. If anything, I probably think my biggest, internet niche would be this stuff, so if you've seen me before, I wouldn't be surprised if it was in this context. I will admit that the entirety of this video is going to be a pretty long yap session. It's going to be one of those things where a lot of you will probably sit back in your chair and say, you need to go outside. And I'm not disagreeing with you, man. I feel like if you clicked on this video and you already knew what I'm about to talk about, you have to be a part of a really niche space within an already niche space. But it's okay if you don't, because I'm going to explain everything for you. You're not alone. I love hearing about random stuff I'm not a part of as well. We're talking about questionable terms of service in the character trading community today. But whether you're familiar with the topic of this video or not, whatever your interests are, I think I can bet you that you'll still benefit from hearing about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Some feedback I've gotten from a lot of the people who watch my content is that they like to play my videos in the background, sort of like a lengthy podcast, while they do some other task like draw or clean or do homework. You get the idea. And what I've gathered from that means my audio quality is very important, and that means I put a lot of time and effort into the audio editing process portion of my videos. But there are so many features that exist in the programs that I use that I've never even touched before because I really just don't know how to use them. So I started to think that maybe it's time that I just figured out how to use all these features, because it's very possible that the things that are taking me so long to do, that I'm doing by hand, could very easily be automated and I didn't even know. That's where Skillshare comes in. But what's the big deal about Skillshare? Skillshare is the largest online learning community with thousands of expert-led classes across a variety of different genres, be it film, animation, art, business, and more. And that's not all. The platform offers a variety of different features to enhance your learning experience, such as the ability to sort through classes by the software that you're using, and their learning paths, which have a sequential collection of related classes so you can master your skill. The class that I found was called Recording and Editing a Voiceover. Make amateur voiceover sound professional without expensive gear. And honestly, there was so much more information here that taught me a lot of the features of my editing software that I had no idea existed. From my experience, you always sort of learn even more than what you were originally looking for, which is really cool. If you're interested, then you're in luck, because the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so get started today. So character trading. You might know what that is, and you might not. Basically, the concept is generally about artists trading or selling the rights to a character design to other people, often other artists. It might sound a little weird, but basically the reason why this appeals to people, again often to artists, is because once you own the character, it's yours and you can do whatever you want with it. So you can, in most contexts, adapt its design to fit your liking, use it to represent you online, place it in a comic or something, draw and commission art for it, and things like that. Most people who participate within art spaces have a character that they use to identify themselves, but some people like to have multiple, which maybe they use to represent themselves in separate contexts or just as a side character of theirs. A recurring theme that I want you to think about throughout this video is that there isn't really a real concrete description of what a character is for when you buy it. So what falls under ownership? What exactly are you paying for? I feel like different people will answer this differently. You may say to draw it, that's the primary purpose, but I would argue that you could have drawn the character already before you owned it. So why are you giving up money to have this character belong to you? What do you gain from that? I'm not saying it's worth nothing, but I'm going to talk about that more in depth later because I think it's really important to think about. Another thing that's really important to think about here, a branch from the same tree if you will, is that as a lot of other freelance artists know, there are no real rules in place for selling your art, and more specifically your designs, online. There are a few laws around this type of payment exchange, don't get me wrong, but usually those are more heavily and regularly enforced for character design or art exchanges between big corporations, not just some kid on the internet selling their art, unfortunately. So you do have to sort of set the rules yourself for you and the client in this exchange, unless you want to get the law involved every time, which is not going to be very fun for you. I'm pretty adamant that I think that every artist who gives away or sells art online should have a terms of service. And that basically means exactly what it sounds like. Drawing something for someone is a service, so these are rules that you're agreeing to if you want that service. The reason I encourage this so heavily is because when you're participating in this type of e-commerce where most of the time you're giving someone something that isn't a tangible product that they can hold in their hands, but rather a PNG or even just a concept, not everyone is going to agree with what they think that they can and should do with it once they receive it. So it's good to set some sort of ground expectation so you don't have to worry as much that these people are going to turn around and do something that you wouldn't be okay with. If there's anything you wouldn't want to happen to what you're selling, it's in the best interest for both you and your client if you specify those things before they make the purchase, because now you can be satisfied that they know what they're paying for and they're going to abide by your boundaries, and they know the limitations of this thing that they're paying you to own before they pay for it. But with this there comes a good deal of controversy, because here you have every every artist basically just doing whatever they feel like. And again, people are going to have varying opinions on what someone's freedoms should be with the design that they pay for. The whole foundation of this industry is everyone in the community basically agreeing to do what makes the most sense and feels the most ethical. Because okay, the first comment you're always going to hear from someone outside the community is, well, it's just a PNG. What's stopping me from just downloading it without paying you? Can't anyone do that? And yes, yeah, that's true, but people are often buying these things like art and designs because they want to, in some capacity, exist and interact with the art community. If you're stealing stuff, you're not going to be able to do that for very long because the moment you post it publicly, it really won't take a long time for people to link it back to the artist you stole it from. People ask to know the designer of a character all the time. If you refuse to tell, you look suspicious. If you tell, you look suspicious. So basically, there's no way to get around it. That's the foundation of the industry. That's why it's a thing that works out the way it does. There are people who their literal job revolves around this. But hypothetically, yeah, someone could buy a design but then fully ignore the terms of service or break them, whether intentionally or not. So artists have tried to find workarounds for that occurrence. And we're going to talk about some of those workarounds and some of those terms of service in general because they're not super great always, and a lot of them generate a lot of controversy. Also, a disclaimer here. I know that you can do whatever you want. I know that. We know that. Yes, an artist could write whatever they wanted to in their terms of service. An artist could say you have to pay them every time you draw the OC, and put that in their terms of service. If someone's okay with that, then sure, they can accept to those terms and abide by them. That's fine. But just because you can do whatever you want, that doesn't make you immune to criticism of the behavior. It does not mean that people won't have a problem with it. It does not mean that people can't talk about it. If we're trying to have an intelligent conversation here and the only thing that you have to say is that you can do whatever you want, then I don't feel like we're getting anywhere. It's not really about what artists can and can't do. What we're talking about today is our opinions on that. We can say whatever we want. So please bear that in mind. Ethics can be argued whether it's illegal or not, whether you can physically do something or not. We're starting off with one of the most controversial things in the character design scene as of recently. It's a conversation that I used to never really see, but as of recently, I've seen people talk about this a lot more. For this video, I put a Google form out a while back, and I basically sent it everywhere, and I just asked you guys to fill it out as honestly as you could so I could gather some opinions from the character trading community and see whether these things that I think are controversial are actually controversial. And this one definitely was. We were more skewed towards no, we don't like this, but there was a considerable amount of people who said yes, they're okay with it. Something I noticed was that we tended to have stronger opinions in this respect towards no, as in way more people answered 1 versus the almost non-existent amount of people who said 4. But there were still a considerable amount of 3s. So I thought that was interesting. I'm pretty sure it's a proven concept that people don't like to pick the extremes, so they'll gravitate towards the middle, which is actually why I didn't provide a neutral option, despite people asking. But for some of the questions here, I think people felt so strongly about their opinion that this concept didn't even hold up. If you've been outside in the past few days, basically revoking a design is the concept of an artist taking a design that they sold or gave away to someone else back. Either because that person broke their terms of service, that person was exposed to be I don't know, the center of a controversy or something like that. If the artist just doesn't like how that person ended up using a design, they might revoke the ownership of it and then resell the design to another person or just keep it or whatever. They are now the owner of that design again. And your immediate thought might be, how? How can you revoke a design? That doesn't make sense. The PNG is still downloaded to their computer, right? You can't force them to delete the page. How can you remove conceptual ownership of a product you can't actually touch or hold? Now, one thing I want to say is, again, this argument gets brought up a lot in the design trading scene. It's a PNG, so anyone can download it, so basically what you guys do doesn't make sense and won't hold up. But you do want to consider here that people already know this concept, right? They already know that anyone can download it. Artists know that, and customers do too. But if you're paying money for a character, then you did, at some point, want to own the design legitimately. So if someone who bought your design in the first place is having it revoked, they might actually care about whether or not they're the quote-unquote actual owner, because they did pay real money for it to begin with. So this might be seen as a real threat to them. But it's easy to lose that respect, I guess, when you feel like what the artist is doing is wrong. You might be confused why so many artists are not okay with this concept. I think it stems from that question. What's the actual point of buying a design? A lot of people feel like ownership should be full, and they should be allowed to freely use designs in whatever ways they wanted to, because that's what they were paying for. They paid for the ability to do so. So the concept of, oh, you redesigned this character too much, I'm taking it away. Or, oh, I don't like you anymore, so I don't want you owning my design, so I'm taking it away, sparks this sense of irritation and frustration because they feel like the purpose of giving you money in the first place was to have this character be under their name, and they don't feel like you, as the designer, have the right to change your mind after you already received your payment, because this design is no longer under your control, you sold the rights to it. But from the flip side, artists don't like to lose control of their creations. Especially when on the internet it's a lot easier to track and see what's happening to it once they sell it away. If you're selling something physically, it's a lot easier to adopt an out-of-sight, out-of-mind perspective. Like, you technically have no idea what's going on with it right now, but it's not hard to just not give a fuck, because at the end of the day, you got your money and you might never see that person again. But on the internet, you can actively check up on a character and on the person you sold it to. You can actively see how they're using it, and people can trace it back to you very quickly. That makes it kind of difficult to pretend you don't notice something you don't like, especially when it might be associated with your name now. And when artists are sitting in front of their screen getting ready to type up a terms of service, it's very hard not to imagine all these things happening to the designs you're making that you wouldn't be cool with. And in that case, obviously a lot of artists will add rules, which I think they're in some degree entitled to do. But then they're thinking of more hypotheticals, like, what if someone just ignores these rules? I have no way to enforce it. So that's when revoking a design becomes a practice. So how do I feel about this? I don't like it, especially without any compensation. My perspective on designs and trading and such has kind of evolved over the past years I've been involved with it, and now I just kind of feel like for a design to be worth purchasing, I want to own it. I don't want the designer to have control over it when I paid them for nothing else but to own it. It makes me kind of feel like you don't know what you're really selling to me. You didn't sell me a PNG, just so you know, we went over that. You sold me character rights. Do I intend on doing nefarious scam behavior or something? No, I don't. But I want to be able to treat that design like I would any other character I own and not have to keep second-guessing myself on things that I think naturally would be associated with character ownership. It makes sense to me that you don't want to lose control over your art. But if that anxiety is so prevalent, then my question is, why are you selling the rights to it? But I don't want people doing this, that, or the other thing. Okay, sure, then stop selling it to strangers maybe? I don't know. You're charging them, right? You're writing their name on it, but you're not ready to fully erase yours. That's how I see it. It's stupid, I don't know. I'm glad there were a lot of people on the forum to confirm I'm not crazy for thinking that. I brought up compensation because I think that's the most fair situation in most contexts. I do not think that an artist should be able to abruptly decide on their own that someone did something warranting them to take a design away and then just do so and make 2 times the money off of it, and just expect the other person to comply. It's not that I think artists are trying to be unethical or that they don't have the best intentions, but I feel like a lot of the time it's a subjective situation. Some artists put terms, which we'll get to later, but terms like, do not redesign to the point that the character is unrecognizable. But what constitutes unrecognizable isn't quantitative, it's not a number, it's qualitative. If you made a white cat with zebra print on it and I thought, this is cute, but I don't really like zebra print, which I'd never say, by the way, but you know, and I switched it to polka dots, technically that's very different than the original design because the original design didn't have that many identifying features to begin with. I changed one thing, but that design is still really different. But you're telling me in this context you think it's okay for the artist to say, nope, this violated my terms of service in my opinion. That's my design again, fuck you. But artists can put whatever they want in their terms of service. You agreed to it when you bought the design. Nope, we talked about that. Just because you can do whatever you want doesn't invalidate my point here. And by the way, when I say that, don't pancakes and waffles me here. I'm not saying that you disagreeing with someone's terms of service automatically justifies breaking them, no matter how valid your point is. I would never do that. I've seen terms of service that I think are the most bullshit, ridiculous, unethical things I've seen, but if I like the character enough, I'll weigh the pros and cons, and I'll buy it, and I'll suck it up. But that doesn't mean I'm not gonna complain about it on YouTube like the fuck. If you want to take my design away, how about we be mature about it, and let's have a conversation, and maybe offer to, compensate me if I had a legitimate reason for disagreeing with your rationale? And because, as artists often do, which I don't necessarily blame them for, it's a rough world, but I think I'm gonna see a lot of people leaping for the most extreme situation they can think of to justify the entire concept. So I'll talk about it. So what about that once-in-a-while guy who is nefarious or whatever? What if it's not about reselling the design? What if they just point blank, no extra to it, they just broke your rules? I will admit, It wouldn't make sense for me to promote that artists should have a terms of service, but then say they should just do nothing about it when a person comes along who fully intends to disrespect it. And I'm not saying that, but I still don't think take backsies revoking it is the right approach. Because if you're dealing with someone that disrespectful and malicious, they don't care what you think. They're very likely going to keep using it, maybe on a different website where they can hide the fact from you, maybe blatantly in front of you. I just really don't think they'll be like, sure, take it back, why not? Unless they have a huge platform they're trying to protect or something. It gives me the same energy as, do not interact if homophobic and racist. Like, they don't care! What is this accomplishing? It's not even just about them. When you proceed to resell this design to some innocent person, it's literally not right to sell it to someone without explaining the situation, because what the hell? Like, I'm not blaming you, but I am not buying that shit. Like, knowing someone else thinks they own it right now? No, what? So my advice instead, in this extreme context, get the site involved, report them, explain the situation. I know everyone says it never works, but at least try first what it does sometimes. Especially if you're posting on an art website. Keep documents and screenshots of the fact that they agreed to your terms in the first place, post it publicly. I'm not big on callouts, but ruining someone's public image is a much more effective way to get someone to stop posting stuff that you don't like instead of just telling them to. There are workarounds to enforce your terms of service. Use them. They're usually more effective. That is my strong request. But yes, you can do whatever you want. This one, I feel like, is less controversial in the sense that a lot of us feel a similar way about it. Or at least that's what I could gather from the forum. But it's weird because I still see it everywhere. Like, almost every artist who does sell character designs that I've come across has a point in some way related to this on their terms of service. Which is weird because, like, I'm just gonna put the graph of the responses on the screen real quick. As of writing this, almost half the respondents answered 1. As in, like, the lowest value you could possibly answer. So what that means is basically people like to redesign their characters, as in, they like to make changes to what a character's design looks like. But when you buy a design from another person, sometimes they have limitations on this idea. Right, because maybe you want that design that you made to be preserved. Possibly because of pride, as in you took time and effort to make that design and you don't want to see that time and effort replaced by something you didn't make, and maybe with a design that in your eyes is worse. Possibly because of name attribution, as in you don't want your name attached to work that isn't wholly yours, and you don't want people to have the freedom to redesign your character willy-nilly because maybe at a certain point it doesn't look enough like your original design to be a design associated with your name. And now bear in mind, from what I've experienced, very few artists actually say that you cannot redesign their characters. We've evolved from that, it's rare to see that. Usually you'll get some variation, trying to allow people some wiggle room, but have some standards still in place for an extreme scenario. So the most common term from what I've seen is almost word for word like this. Do not redesign to the point where it is unrecognizable from the original design. And it's not uncommon at all to see this added onto with something like, original artwork must be kept in a separate tab in Toy House contexts, or preserve the original features. Allow me to go on a soapbox tangent here, within this already soapbox tangent of a video. Redesigning is the most enjoyable part of buying a character design for me. I almost never fully connect with the base design, like ever. There's always something that I want to add to it, even if it's just a design clothing or accessories that I think the character would like. To flesh out its personality with some baseline characteristics, like it's usually frowning and grumpy, or it's always maniacally happy, or some other features that add something to it that I saw in the base design before I bought it. I don't just buy designs every time I like how they look. I like how a lot of designs look. I only buy designs when I like how they look and they inspire me to do something more. A part of this is because something I've come to terms with is that the primary reason, in my opinion, to buy a character is not just to draw it. You can draw a character without paying for it. If the only reason I wanted it was to draw it exactly the way it was, there's no point in wasting my money. Open your sketchbook and draw it. If you want to post it, just do. Most artists won't care. In fact, they'll appreciate you boosting the inherent value of the character. If they really didn't like it, they'll ignore it, and that's fine too. You're free to draw whatever you want. The benefit of owning a character that goes beyond what you can do without paying for it is developing it, is change. You can doodle concepts of a character you don't own, but you can't make it official if it's not yours. You can't see other artists replicate the same concept. You can't add your love and imagination to it. I don't like being forced to limit my creativity for the sake of someone else's pride or opinions on what I make. If you are proud of your design, all the power to you. Download it and keep it. Put it on a portfolio. The art piece is still yours and nobody is taking that away from you. I'm not taking that away from you. I don't want to take that away from you, because you deserve to feel proud of something you came up with, and you deserve the freedom to post it. So do I, though. I'm paying you for the right to do that. Why the hell did you sell it to me if you're so attached to the base design that you cannot cope with it changing? If that's the case, you should not be selling the ownership of the design to begin with. Because at the end of the day, you're not okay with someone else owning it. You don't want to see it be loved. And that's okay. Nobody is telling you that you have to sell every design that you make. It's okay to just keep them. Yeah, it's nice when people pay you, I get it. But that often means you're giving something up. Unfortunately, you can't keep the thing that you sold. Buying a character just so that I can draw it exactly how it is and then retrade it to the next person feels soulless and a sink of my money. You can disagree, maybe that's how you move, and that's fine, but that's how I feel. The concept is anti-artist to me, which is insane because it's literally coming from artists. We're viewing these creations as flat-priced products. We're slowly sucking the actual fun and enjoyment from a hobby, and we're commercializing it so heavy to the point where we're acting like corporations working with consumers instead of people working with people. That might be looking too deep into it, but that's how I see it. And I don't think that this is the intention in mind that artists who say this have. They are trying to be diplomatic, and what they usually have in mind when writing this kind of thing is some sort of crazy person who's buying a design just to change it into a completely different one with your name still attached to it, which almost never fucking happens because there's literally zero motivation to do this, unless I guess you're a huge designer and they wanted a design in your name, but they just don't fucking like your work, I guess. But whatever, you know, artists who do this, they just want to be prepared for this situation in case it happens, because you never know. But again, like what I mentioned earlier, these aren't quantitative statements. People don't automatically know when they've crossed over this line. Stop designing your terms of service around these extreme hypotheticals that will happen in 0.5% of your commission experiences that usually revolve around a completely separate problem of these people just straight up trolling you or acting like lunatic criminals online. Your terms of service aren't for those 0.5% of people. They aren't for the lunatic criminals. They're probably the ones who aren't even reading them. This isn't doing anything good for you. All it does is have unintended consequences by pissing people off and making them feel like they have to keep wondering whether you'll be okay with it if they do the most basic crap with this design that they paid you to own for the rights to it. I get in a lot of context it really isn't that serious, but I don't like seeing this normalized because I wish we were able to just let go of this thing we're selling away instead of clinging to our ownership of it when it isn't supposed to belong to us anymore. It's not a handbag, it's not a Ferrari, it's a character design. Do we really want our market to be treated the same way as material crap? Like, do you want that? Last thing we're going to talk about today is how artists handle the concept of reselling. Now, it makes sense why we feel awkward about this and we want to regulate it. When it comes to someone else profiting off of something you made, you might be uncomfortable. That makes sense. If you're unfamiliar, basically in the trading community, these designs are often in constant circulation. At a certain point when you buy a design, you might just lose connection to it. You don't have that spark anymore. Maybe you just don't like drawing it as much as you used to. Maybe you have no more ideas for it. Maybe it's just been rotting, untouched in your gallery and you see no point in keeping it anymore. In that scenario, a lot of people would rather rehome it than just hold on to it when it has no value to them anymore. But it's not always in someone's best interest to just hand away this design for free. You may have spent a lot of money to buy that character originally. You may have invested a lot of time and money to draw this character and commission art for it. So often when people rehome their designs, they ask for a resale, or they trade that character for another one. As of today on the forum, about 84% of respondents said they have retraded or resold a design before. So most of us do this. Designers get uncomfortable with this because they're worried about their designs being used to simply flip and resell at a higher value, like drop shipping, but in the design world, I guess. They worry that someone is just going to use their design for profit. So based on the forum, how most people felt was that designs should only be resold for the amount originally paid, added to with the value they put into the character through the duration of their ownership. That was the overwhelming majority. As of now, not a single person said no, a design should never be resold. 17% just said yes, so assuming people should be able to resell with no limitations. 4.7% said yes, but only for the amount they originally paid. But in general, we do think that yes, people should be allowed to resell a design if they don't want it anymore. Which is good. I think the character trading community is healing in that respect. How I feel is that, yeah, I generally agree that a design's resale value should be capped at the original price, unless it was added to with extra art and stuff, which I do think should make the value of the character go up. I don't think you should be able to just flip and resell a character's base design for more money. There were actually people on the forum who said in the free response that they think you should just be able to do that. Here's one quote at random that I found through scrolling because there's like a lot of these and I didn't read every single one, but they said, "In my opinion, a design's worth is whatever a buyer will pay for it. It isn't unethical to resell a design for more than you got it for. You should price character resales at what people will pay for it, even if that's lower than the amount of money that you sank into it. Why do we think dropshipping is bad? Because it's exploitative. Someone less fortunate is getting taken advantage of, very often children or the hungry or people who really shouldn't be in that situation. And then someone else is profiting, very often some white guy in the West. We think that's wrong, right? We think exploiting people for money is wrong? I hope so. I don't think that designs should just be sold for whatever the buyer is willing to pay in all contexts. I mean, yeah, if they want to pay 3 times the base value, then sure, they can go for that. I do think it's in the responsibility of the customer to do their research about what they're buying. There's nothing stopping you from just going through the ownership logs or even just asking questions about what the person originally paid. I think it's in the owner's responsibility to have that information readily available. "I forgot" isn't a good enough answer if you don't know what you paid, by the way. I don't think you should be selling that design at all. So sorry that you straight up didn't log the value of the character when you paid for it and lost all your receipts. Anyways, there's the big question about where worth comes from, though. What counts as added worth? We were mostly skewed towards the fact that personal art, as in art that you made yourself, does add value to a character. We were actually very unsure about whether art that was gifted or traded to you by someone else counts. I didn't ask about commissioned art, but I figure that would have been an overwhelming yes. I will say something here. I don't think that worth is always a number that can be quantified. You can try to estimate it, which I often do, and I try to do so because I think it's fair to provide customers with at least a number that they can go off of. But I think it's weird to say in your terms that, quote-unquote, people can't sell a design for more than it is worth, when worth itself is subjective and not always quantifiable. The moment you add art to a character, as in art by anyone, the worth changes. If you add the most gorgeous profile picture to the character, then people might be willing to pay more now, because they want to use that drawing. Maybe the person who made that profile picture usually sells profile pictures for, say, $15. So you may say that the expressed worth is $15 plus the original value. But someone might be willing to pay way more than that for that specific drawing because they thought it was really good. Maybe they put more effort into that drawing than they usually do with their profile pictures, I don't know. And then there's gifted and traded art, which we couldn't agree on. What if that profile picture wasn't a commission? What if it was a birthday present or a gift? Does that make it worth $0 even though it makes the character more desirable and people value the character more because of it? Now, how I usually operate is I only add personal art and a commissioned art to a worth log. This hasn't been updated in over a year, so his worth is probably like double this amount by now. But here's my main character's worth log. But this character has over 3,000 images. Obviously, I'm never selling him, and a lot of that art is low-effort sketches that I made to relax or something. But even if we just averaged all of the values and said every drawing was worth $1, which is crazy undervaluing some and crazy overvaluing others, that's still over $3,000. If I ever did sell a character like this, I feel like it would be unfair to be forced to sell it for $700 or even $1,400, knowing that his true worth and the way people will value him is way, way more. And usually, of course, we're operating on a lower scale than this, but I do think my point still stands. I honestly think that the moment you add art to the character, it should be able to be resold for whatever value. It doesn't really affect you if people are making more money off of this character than you originally did because under their ownership, its value increased. And you might say that, no, Ash, that could still be exploitative. What if someone just adds a dozen low-quality doodles and then they try to resell it again for 5 times the value or something? But okay, if they try that and people don't perceive the worth at that value, it won't sell. And again, I do think that it's in the owner's responsibility to keep their receipts and provide the original value if asked for it. If someone asks for the original value and they say it was worth $10 and then they're trying to sell it for $40 with some shitty doodles, no sane person is going to be like, okay, sure, and then they just hand you that money. Unless they actually do want those doodles or they actually do want the character that bad for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe you're famous and they want your sketches, I don't know. And in that case, then the character really is worth that much money to them. So that's how I feel about that. Something I want to say through all of this is that I feel like we're fighting imaginary battles. We're adding terms of service that won't even apply to a majority of our clients or buyers or whatever you're going to call them to prepare for these fictitious, hypothetical what-if scenarios. And we're not putting actual concrete thought into how they can be taken the wrong way or limit artistic freedom for innocent people who weren't trying to do anything wrong. I do think that the root of this issue isn't that artists have malicious intent. I think that this community does place a lot of importance on ethical accountability and consciousness. So by that I mean I genuinely believe that a huge majority of us actually do care about doing the right thing. And to some degree I think that's why huge controversies exist here in the first place. Which, as exhausting as it can be, I'm at least thankful that we're talking about it and people care enough to listen. Because you're really not going to find that in a lot of other communities. What I think the actual problem is that for this specific scenario, we don't really put that much thought into those things that we're writing until we start talking about it. I think the reason why so many people's terms of service look so incredibly similar is because we sort of just reference what other people are doing, and then we jot it down ourselves because we suppose it sounds good enough. I literally remember a few years ago, one of my Twitter mutuals that I didn't even talk to that much copy and pasted my entire terms of service into theirs without asking. And I don't, care, so if you're watching this and that's still what you use, then you don't have to change it, I don't care. But I think that really goes to show that we kind of just put stuff there because it sounds right, but we're not sitting down and handwriting them with actual likely occurrences in mind. And by likely, I just mean that I don't think we should be crafting our entire terms of service to protect us from some hypothetical criminal mastermind who may one day come along and try to profit off of us and scam us to the highest degree. I'm not saying those things never happen. They do happen. But if they do happen to you, a flimsy terms of service is not always going to do much for you, and a lot of the time, the types of things they're doing are already illegal and go way beyond don't resell my characters. It's not going to make them reconsider, at the very least. I guess that yeah, in a legal scenario it does help you to say, well, I wrote it down first and they agreed to that, but I encourage you at the very least to think about your phrasing and how it could be taken by the majority of people that you're interacting with instead of that one non-existent guy for that one non-existent scenario. And that begs the question, who are terms of service for? I don't think they're for the criminals. I think they're for everyday customers to answer questions about your boundaries that aren't already implied, or about your process that might not immediately be known. They're for things like, what payment method do you accept? They're for things like, how do I credit you and your art and your design? Not things like, what if I'm a scammer or a really big criminal, okay? How do I follow your boundaries while scamming you? I think you should repeatedly ask yourself as you handwrite your terms of service, is this something I should be saying about someone else's property? Because that's what you're selling if you're not already aware. You're not selling a file, you're selling ownership rights. Is don't change the design in a way I wouldn't like something you would say about someone else's property? Is don't resell your design when you're done with it something you would say about someone else's property? And one more time for the people in the back before I wrap up this video, because ideally this is the point where you open the comment section and you share your thoughts. I know that artists can do whatever they want. I am not saying or encouraging that we rampantly break people's terms of service on purpose for the sake of moral justice. I'm not saying that artists are required under law to change their terms to match what I think is ethical. Do what you want, but I appreciate you at least listening and taking into consideration what was said today. This is Ash from Quiz. If you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed hearing me talk, please consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you for watching. So hey endcard viewers, I hope this video was enjoyable or educational or whatever to some degree. Sorry for losing myself and getting a little overly passionate at parts. I kind of noticed while I was talking that it was a little much, but I do care about this, so that's why. In the Google form, which thank you to everyone who responded to that by the way, there was definitely some more questions I asked that I didn't address today, and a part of that was lack of time and another was lack of relevance. So I do plan to use those concepts for a new video coming up at some point, so don't worry if you still wanted to hear me talk about that, I will at a certain point. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.